All right, Beth, if you want to introduce us.
Hi, my name is Beth Folcher, and I live in Pennsylvania. And my son Luke was born with LCHAD in 2005. So, one of the things that my husband and I have always loved so much when we travel, when, food is just so much a part of what we do in our culture. And so, I wanted to make sure that Luke was able to also enjoy some of the things that we grew up eating. But obviously still being safe for him. Are you going to introduce yourself or?
That's fine. Yeah. So I'm Stephanie Harry, and my son Christopher is 13 years old with LCHAD. And Beth and I met when Chris was really small and reached out and became buddies, shared stories. And Beth has been a huge help in just, learning the nutrition process and stuff. And so we were excited to do this presentation together and talk a little bit about our nutrition journeys, but also just share some tips that we've learned along the way. So Beth's going to talk a little bit about how we counter fat, and there's a lot of similarities between how families do this, and also there's some differences. So we're going to chat a little bit about that.
Yeah. Let me just start by saying, when I started this journey in 2005, there was nothing. There were no cookbooks. There was nothing. And so a lot of what I've learned, and I think what Stephanie has learned as well, is just trial and error. Does it taste good? And does it fit the dietary requirements? And so, along those lines, that's the first place you want to start. Does it fit the dietary requirements? And you always want to listen to your doctors and your nutritionists about how to count the fat and stay within those healthy ranges. So some people count the grams of long chain fats only. Some people count grams of all fats, including what's already in their formulas, whether it's Procal, Monogen, Portogen, and some people do percentages. It just based on their caloric intake. It just whatever's easier for you, whatever your doctor recommends, that's what we would recommend doing as well. And for example, I live in Pennsylvania, and kind of halfway between New York City and Philadelphia. Luke is seen at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and he's allowed to have 33 grams of fat. Now, he's also 162 pounds right now, so that kind of adds to it because he needs more calories in order to be healthy and keep going. So what we do is we take that 33 grams of fat per day, and we just kind of portion it out throughout the day, usually using 10 grams of fat as a guide. If we know we're going out to dinner or having something special, then we'll go a little easier for breakfast and lunch. And then he can have a little bit more and indulge a little bit more for dinner. Christopher, by contrast, is in Atlanta, Georgia, and his doctors recommend he gets 10 grams of fat in addition to what he's already taking in through his, is it Monogen?
He actually is on Lipostart.
Oh,
yeah.
Lipostart, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. So they count their fats as about 3 grams of fat and snacks throughout each day. But the biggest takeaway we can say is, plan out your meals. We plan everything when we go on vacation, what we're eating for the week. We kind of have a whole idea of what we're going to do for the week and kind of work around that, just to kind of get the most variety and also the most nutrition for your whole family.
Yeah, and the amount of fat that your child will be able to have, it very much is specific to your dietitian, but also their genetic mutation. So you can see just between the difference between Beth's son and my son that, they're also different in age, but it just really depends on how much body, how much their body is able to process. And so your dietitians will work close with you guys on that and monitoring that. So don't be worried, but just realize that there's a variability when you talk to parents. And so it's really important to follow your own dietitian's guidelines when it comes to that.
Right. So labels, I titled this slide, labels, 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 because it's so important to understand how to read your labels. Products sometimes change their recipes. So it's important, even though it might say low fat and it might be the same product you've been having for, years and years and years, always check, not every single time maybe, but periodically, just to make sure that they haven't changed the amount of fat. And I think what is most important is looking at serving size, because you might see, oh, total fat, it's only 1 gram of fat. That's awesome. But in that package, there might be 20 servings. So you can't eat the whole package, of, let's say, potato chips. So you have to really be mindful of serving size with fat, and then just do like some really simple math. Another thing that I've noticed about labels is packaging can be really, really misleading. So you don't want to just go on, oh, it's reduced fat. Well, reduced fat sausage, for example, can sometimes be just as high if they're using dark meat chicken as regular pork sausage. So you really have to look at those labels, and we've provided you with kind of like just a sample one that I found. Turkey hot dogs are probably one of the bigger ones that there's a lot of variation, because it really just depends on what part of the turkey that they use. Jenny O, for example, has 6 grams of fat per turkey hot dog, whereas the Hebrew National, which is made with beef, has only 1 gram of fat per link. So you have to just kind of evaluate what's more worth it to you as a family. For example, if you don't want any red meat at all in your family, then you go with the higher gram of fat for the turkey sausage, and then cut the fat out somewhere else throughout the day.
Oh, I realized I was muted. That's a lot about this, is just getting creative and realizing that throughout this journey, our goal is always going to be as creative as we can. And it gives us a chance to be creative with food. This next component is a little bit about nutrition and the importance of starting to get your kids thinking about nutrition now. It's never too early to start getting your child thinking about nutrition, and for you to be thinking about nutrition. There's a young mom on here whose kiddo is 11 years old, and it's wonderful that she's thinking about nutrition now, because they grow so quick, and nutrition is just like anything that a child learns. It has to be built upon. And it starts when they're really young. The way that we have approached Christopher's LCHAD very much stems from my sister's experience. When she was younger, she had cancer. And so Children's Hospital, the way that they approached her cancer was to be very direct and very honest with her. And so that's kind of how we've always approached Christopher's LCHAD. He's known from a very young age that he has LCHAD. And the beauty of that, having that understanding at a young age, is that we talk about it. We talk about his LCHAD, and we also talk about his nutrition. It's very very casual conversation. We're able to communicate about a lot of things, and everything is able to be talked about and through. And so now, how you talk to them when they're in preschool versus middle and high school is going to be very different. Again, it's about building on. And so when Christopher was in preschool and elementary school age, a lot of the things that we did, when he was really small, were hands-on. It was things like we had a little play kitchen that he would cook on while I was cooking, and we just talked about foods. And then I created this book called My Special Body. There's also a book out there that is for this. My Special Body is geared towards kids with LCHAD, VLCAD, and TFP, but there's another book for kids with MCAD. And these books talk a little bit about, fats in your body, and how your body's a little bit different. And the nice thing about books, whether it's books that are specifically geared toward your child's metabolic condition, or whether it's books that are just generally about the body, is that you can have really intimate conversations, and sometimes hard conversations, and then you can shut the book and put it away to the side. And kids really need that space to be able to talk about something and then be able to shut it and kind of move on. The other thing that we did with Christopher as he was small is we did something called a Rick and Wreck. You can see the picture there on the slide. And what it is you have these beads, and we had one that represented MCT oil and one that represented his total fat that he could have for the day. And we didn't do this every day, because life can get busy, but we try to do it on the weekends or even more on the summer, just to get him practicing counting when he's had some MCT oil, or practice counting, like if we had breakfast, about how much fat is in that. Oh, 2 grams. And so then he would go and move 2 beads over, because that's just kind of a small way to get him start thinking about, oh, fat is important, or fat is in everything that I eat, because every time I eat, I'm going and moving a bead, or, that I can only have a certain amount of fat. And so that's kind of how we started introducing the topic of fat and nutrition to him. And the other fun thing that I loved when he was smaller was taking him to the grocery store. I mean, food, like Beth said, is a part of our daily existence, right? We eat food every day. So there's plenty of time to have conversation about food. And when you go to the grocery store, you can do things like pointing out fruits and vegetables, to things like showing them, what makes a good apple, or what makes a good bell pepper, or what makes a rotten piece of broccoli. And then also letting them choose the different vegetables out and bringing it home and cooking with it later, gives them a little bit more connection to the food that they're about to eat. And so sometimes I think for picky eaters too, it's really helpful, because it's almost, they have affinity because they just picked it out. So they want to try it more, because they feel like they were part of the process. And so as much as you can do that as possible, I think is really helpful. But this is just a great age to start introducing a little bit of science behind their condition, and just letting them hear some important words, like even just simple things like fat, how to spell it. By the time Christopher's in kindergarten, like that was one of the first words he knew how to spell, because it was important that he could look in the back of a package when he's in his kindergarten class and be able to tell the teacher if he could have something or not. Now, we were always very a part of that process, but that made him feel like he could take ownership to know, like, if this was something he could eat or not. And a piece of advice that was given to me when Christopher was really small that I thought was great was the importance of staying matter of fact about information. As moms or parents, you feel for your kids, like you want them to be able to have whatever they want, but it's good at times if you can just be matter of fact about information, because it helps them to also treat it like this is what it is. This is what we have to work with. And it helps to keep things a little bit normalized in our communication when we do it that way. So you move on from those preschool and years and elementary school years, and you get into the older elementary school, preteens and middle school. And that's where Christopher's at now. And Beth's son is a full-on teen. And so like we have other experiences. How do you talk about nutrition now? And one of the things I realized when Christopher was in 5th grade is that by that time he had adopted a really good eating habit, and he basically ate whatever I put in front of him most of the time. But did he know why he was eating what he was eating? And I realized that he didn't always. And so we started doing these pop quizzes. Christopher's very active. He loves riding his bike and playing basketball and playing baseball. But before he does his activities, he has to fuel up. And so he has his Lipostart, which is his medical formula mixed with cornstarch before he does an activity. And then during that activity, he has Gatorade and sometimes a snack, depending on how long the activity is. And then afterwards, we give him normally like Greek yogurt with muesli on top with MCT oil, because that gives him protein to, help replenish his muscles that have been breaking down, and then it gives him a good carb to store. And so we're very intentional, I guess is what I'm trying to say, about what he eats, when he eats it, and why he eats it. And so we started doing these pop quizzes, and I would just say, pop quiz, like, why do you have MCT oil in your Greek yogurt right now? Or pop quiz, why are you drinking your Lipostart? Or pop quiz, what does the MCT oil do in your body? And if you can have just like those moments, because it's so quick, but it also reminds them, it helps you to see holes and like maybe what they didn't understand, but it also helps remind them, again, it's like building on their current knowledge. Because there was a time that Christopher said, I don't know anything about my LCHAD. And that was around the 5th grade pop quiz time. And I was like, oh my gosh, I failed as a parent. How can he be in 5th grade and he knows nothing about his LCHAD? And then, but I said, okay, I want you to make a list of everything that you know. And so he started making a list, and he realized, oh, he actually knew a whole lot more than he realized he did, And so it's being able to kind of have these kind of moments that I think are really helpful with the older kids. And also just starting to introduce more challenging terms like mitochondria. They learn about cells in 6th and 7th grade. And so making that connection between what they're learning in science, and then also, hey, like, this thing that's going on inside of your body, it happens inside of this mitochondria that you were talking about in science class. And breaking down terms that they hear in clinic, like rhabdomyolysis and inflammation, and asking them if they know what that means. And if you don't know what it means, it's okay, because it's a great time to say, you know what, we're going to write a question to your doctor and bring it to your clinic visit. And that's really helpful because it gets them more involved with their clinic visits and helps them have the practice of asking their doctors questions, which can be hard, but it's a good challenge when you're in that later elementary and middle school age. And then the last piece I would say too is preparing snacks and taking charge of your supplements and stuff. It's a hard balance, I think, as a parent. You want to train them up, you want them to be good advocates for themselves, but you have to do it gradually, right? Otherwise, because they're going to have this condition their whole life. And so I feel like I'm always asking myself, okay, what can Christopher be doing himself? What can he be doing himself? And you know what? I'm just going to do it right now because I'm here. And like, he's going to be out on his own, and he might just need a little extra break today. And then, what is he not quite ready for? And so, as Christopher, when we were full-fledged pandemic, Christopher helped cook once a week with us. And it was just a good way to hone in some of his cooking skills. Now that school started, that happens a little less. But that's okay, because there's other things that are going on and he still has that skill set. But something that he can always do is be in charge of his supplements that he takes. We call it supplemente. It's time to go take your supplemente. And he goes and he takes his supplemente, which I'm realizing he needs to go take his supplemente right now, actually. So I hope he's remembered. But it's good because he takes pride in that. And so when he goes to his clinic visits and they ask him, okay, well, what supplements do you take? He can name them because he remembers them, because he does it every morning and every evening. And so that's just kind of a great way to kind of edge them in to taking charge of some of their nutrition. And so I'm going to share one last piece, and then, because I know I'm getting long-winded, and then Beth's going to take over for a little bit. But the other part, the holidays are coming up. Use your holidays as a way to have important conversations and to create new normals. When Christopher was a baby, I just kept thinking about, how are we going to do Halloween and Thanksgiving and Christmas? And I struggled with that. And honestly, I think Christmas was probably the one I struggled with the most, because in my family, it's been tradition to do fried apple pies. We do it every Christmas. And I was so sad because I'm like, he's never going to be able to have a fried apple pie. And every Christmas morning we make fried apple pies. And I think Christopher was 3 when all of a sudden I realized, well, it might not be fried, but I can do it almost the same exact way, minus the butter. So we took the butter out and that was fine, and bake them, and they taste wonderful and marvelous. And now he can participate. And so sometimes it's just kind of trying to rethink things in your brain. Normally I would say there's always a way, and so if you feel like you're hitting a wall with something that's really important, to change or to incorporate that has been a tradition in your family forever, I encourage you to reach out to some older parents, whether it be Beth or I or other people, because there is a way. I most of the time I find that there is a way. Halloween, Christopher can't eat a lot of the chocolate and things like that, but his buddy Ariane, they used to go trick or treating with each other, and so Ariane kind of taught Christopher how to ask for things that he could have. If somebody put something in his basket that he couldn't have, but they had a lollipop standing right there, Ariane kind of taught Christopher how to be an advocate. And then they exchanged things when they got home, or I always carried like a special little bag that we could exchange things just in case he had items he couldn't eat. And then Thanksgiving is always a hard one because no matter how low fat I try to make Thanksgiving, 10 grams of fat a day is not a lot. And so Thanksgiving has kind of become a time where we sit down and we talk about, okay, what is it that you want the most of? If he wants a little more stuffing, maybe he doesn't get a second slice of pumpkin pie. And it's okay. Like, this is just what we have to do. And so we've used that time to kind of just talk through fat grams and plan. And it's a good habit for them to get into now, because as they get older, they're going to have to make those choices in real life. And so it gives them extra practice to do that in a safe place.
I'm going to talk to you about some substitutions that I've found to be really, really helpful. So swapping out really high fat products for something a little lighter and hiding it. You can hide a lot of stuff. Trust me. So one of the quick substitutions that I've found that helps lower the fat content is if a soup or a sauce calls for heavy cream, I just use fat-free half and half because it still has a little bit of a thicker consistency. It's not as creamy as heavy cream, but you really don't notice it unless you're putting the two dishes completely side by side, which who does that? Whole milk, skim milk. That's a real easy swap out. Egg whites for eggs. Again, it might not bind as well, but honestly, sometimes I've baked something and I've totally forgotten to put the egg whites in completely, and it turned out just fine. It's okay. And I think we're taught so much. You have to have oil, you have to have butter when you're sautéing veggies, and you really don't. There's this one dish I make for Luke, and I put nothing in the pan. I let the onions sweat out and the mushrooms sweat out, and they give a little bit moisture. And when it starts to look like it's getting a little bit dry, I'll maybe add just a little bit of water, help steam up the vegetables a little bit. Broth or even coconut oil is a much better substitute than a full fat like canola or olive oil. And then baking tends to be a little bit trickier, just because there really is no substitute for butter when you're baking, or a shortening when you're baking. The flavor just isn't as intense, but it's totally doable if you substitute your oil and butter or shortening for things like applesauce, pumpkin puree, which really doesn't taste like much at all, bananas I've used, or the MCT oils. And you can even make butter with MCT. And I don't like it by itself, but I don't taste it when it's baked with. So it's really kind of changed our baking game for Luke around the holidays, because he's never been able to eat cookies. And since I started using MCT butter, now all of a sudden he's like, these cookies are awesome. And he's able to have a chocolate chip cookie. Of course, I have to sit there and measure out the chocolate chips, based on what the package tells me, but he still gets that, which I think is good. And we're all healthier for it. This one's yours.
Yeah. So Beth talked a little bit about substitutions, and And yes, I'm gonna skip the first two bullets, and just because she was just talking about MCT butter and C7 butter, you can make butter with MCT oil or C7 oil if you're on that. I did check with Dr. Bockley, and he gave that the go ahead. So I did provide a YouTube channel. There is a demo there of me making it if you want a demo, and there's a recipe there too. I can also put it in the side chat later on if you'd like. But it does change things, and allows you to make things like sugar cookies for the holidays and cinnamon rolls and a lot of the treats that maybe aren't as good for you, but are just fun treats to have, when they're small and when they're big too. So let's just be honest. But the other thing is sometimes you can substitute certain cookie recipes and stuff like that out straight with the oil. Part of it depends on how much oil your kiddo can have, and so sometimes we have to do a bit of a combination between the oil and the MCT butter, because for example, if a half a cup of MCT butter actually only has a fourth of a cup of MCT oil. So if I need a little bit less MCT oil in a baked good, then a lot of times I'll use the MCT butter instead. Um, the other things, now we're going to go back up to the other two bullet points. The first ones is many recipes ask you to use a lot more oil than you actually need. So just like Beth talked about with soups and stuff like that, if a soup recipe calls for a tablespoon of oil, you automatically take that tablespoon out and you've lowered your fat for the entire recipe by 14 grams, which is huge. So think about that. Anytime you see a soup recipe, that can be the first thing that you knock off is that oil. Or maybe, if your child has a long chain fatty acid condition and they can use coconut oil, then, you might be able to put a half a teaspoon or a teaspoon of coconut oil in there, because half of that fat is medium chain fats. If you have a child with MCAD, you do not want to use coconut oil. That's really, really important because it is primarily medium chain fats. The other trick too is when you're cooking with things like fish, one of the things that I learned is a lot of times you can use a lot less oil than what the recipes call for. So for example, for tilapia, we bake it with 1/2 teaspoon of walnut oil. And walnut oil is good because it's high in the essential fatty acids. And a half a teaspoon is a really, really small amount of oil to spread across all four of them. But another fun trick that doesn't require oil at all, or you could put that tiny amount on too, is using the baking sheets. I discovered this recently. I don't know why it took me so long. If you wrap your tilapia in parchment paper before you bake it, and you can either tie it with some baking twine, or you can just wrap it up and stick it straight in on a pan, it is so moist afterwards. It's just amazing. So it's definitely worth a try if you love fish. Another tip is fresh Parmesan cheese always adds a quick bang of taste to your dishes without adding a lot of fat. So, and I'm not talking about the powdered stuff that you get in the store. I'm talking about the blocked Parmesan, really important, because the powdered stuff actually has a lot more fat in it than the blocked Parmesan, and it has less flavor too. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute.
So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about flavors, because I'm one of those people, it needs to hit me in the face with flavor. I can't eat something that's going to taste like cardboard. I've never been a boring eater, so it's something that I've really experimented a lot with. Spices. Oh my gosh, spices are your friends. You should see my spice cabinet. I don't have any more room in my spice cabinet. I have everything, just because it's a great way to add a little bit of extra flavor when you're trying to take out fat, because fat has a taste almost. It makes things it makes them tastier. Let's just say it that way. But if you have to take that out, you want to add something in. Some basic spice combos that I've used, if I'm making like an Italian dish, I'll use salt, parsley, sage, rosemary, thyme, oregano, and marjoram. And there's all kinds of lists, for Mexican or Indian, or, some stuff goes better with chicken or fish. I'm not going to read through all of these for you because you can always go back and look at it. There's also great cheat sheets on the internet. This one link that I found here is from, actually, it doesn't link right directly. You have to kind of copy and paste it, but it's from Penn State University, which is about 3 hours from where we live. And they have a whole food program, like where food science, actually, it's a food science program. So I've used some of their little tips and they're really, really pretty good. But don't be afraid of spices. Spice doesn't mean hot. And also, if you notice in all my little combos, salt is really important. It's really important for flavoring your meats. You don't have to use a lot of it. And yeah, I use a ton of salt. I love salt.
And that kind of leads us to our next point, is that is with salt and with a lot of these things, when you take out the fat, like Beth said, you have to add something back in. And so layering flavors is really important, whether it's a variety of spices or even layering certain basic flavors like sugar and salt. So with sugar, anytime that I'm baking, if a recipe calls for white sugar, I don't just put white sugar in. I cut that in thirds normally, whatever amount that they ask for, and I'll put in brown sugar, white sugar, sugar in the raw, and maybe a dash of honey on top. Because what fat does is it adds a complexity to your palate. And so when you take that out, in order to prevent something from tasting like cardboard, you have to like get those taste buds reactivated, and you have to add some kind of complexity back into it. So if you start layering sugars, that can help, because it kind of sends the flavor around your mouth and around your palate. The same with salt. So with salt, there's all different kinds of salt out there, right? There's kosher salt, there's fine salt, there's Himalayan salt, and some salts you can tell a huge difference between, and some salts you're not really so much. Iodized salt is important. Iodine is important for certain things, but sometimes it can leave a metallic taste, and so with certain baked goods, you might decide not to use that particular kind of salt. But I do wanted to point out the difference between kosher and fine, because kosher is actually made with a larger particle size than the fine salt is. And so fine salt does a really good job of blending and enhancing an overall flavor, whereas kosher salt gives you a bam. And so sometimes it's good to add a little bit of both, because you want that bam at the end, but you also maybe want to enhance the rest of the flavor as well. And so it's just something that you kind of have to play around with, depending on your family and the kind of foods that you're working with. But it is worth playing around with. And the spices, like Beth said too. Beth and I created a helpful tip sheet, and we'll put that in the side chat too. And it has a link to that spice link that she was talking about, which is absolutely amazing, because sometimes it's hard to know which spices go together. But the other thing to think about is dried versus fresh spices. The flavor profile of dried spices is very different than fresh spices. Both are really important in your cooking. Dried and fresh spices, often you will use less of a dried spice because the flavors are a bit more compact than a fresh spice. But don't be afraid to play around with it. You can take a simple chicken and rice dish, where you just sauteed up some onions and carrots and chicken breast and put it in rice. And if that's all you do, it's fine with salt and pepper. But if you add some fresh thyme in there, like all of a sudden the flavor just pops. If you put in some oregano, like it becomes a whole new dish. And the other thing to think about too is that these dried spices that you're adding in are super potent in antioxidants. And so it's not just about, although it's great to add flavor to your dishes, but it's also very healthy for you, and gives you antioxidants, which are really important at fighting inflammation, which is one of the things our kiddos often struggle with. The other last piece that I want to mention is that crushing fresh spices right before you use them adds more flavor. So if you can get a spice whole, going that extra mile of having a mortar and pestle, do not be afraid of the mortar and pestle. The mortar and pestle is your friend. And I learned this when I was making a pumpkin muffin recipe and I did not have any ground cloves but I had whole cloves. And so I was like, I'll just grind them up and see what happens. And it changed my world. I will not lie. I ate those muffins and I was like, oh my gosh, these are amazing. I mean, they were fine before, but just that little extra burst of spice. And so think about that with your other spices, whether it is with your peppercorn or whether it is with your coriander or any of the spices that you can get whole are lovely. So now we're going to get to the fun part where Beth's going to talk a little bit about altering recipes. So let's get cooking.
So one of the things that we wanted to do, and especially if you have kids, other kids who are not affected, is making your life simpler. And so making one base dish where everybody has a say in it and everybody's eating the same thing, just maybe with little, different things, that gives kids ownership. But it also satisfies even the pickiest eaters. So one thing that we do often is taco night. And so I make we prepare the base low fat protein, whether it's chicken or shrimp, and then our shells, and then toppings that are appropriate for an FAOD kid would be salsa, low fat, cream cheese, black beans. My son adores black beans. He puts them on everything. Plus it gives you that added protein. And then just sliced up veggies. This kid loves onions. So I just slice up onions and they're so good for you. Jalapeno peppers. He puts those on everything. And then that way, mom and dad or little brother or sister who are not affected can also have their guac and sour cream and regular fat full cheese. And nobody really feels deprived. And mom didn't have to make, or dad didn't have to make 2 separate meals. Another thing that we love to do, this might be Luke's favorite, maybe mine too, is homemade pizza night. And you can get as creative and fancy as I have gotten in the past, just because I love it so much. Or you can be really, really quick and easy. It can be a quick and easy thing. If you buy a prepackaged dough, sometimes you can use flatbreads. Just look at the fat content. And all you have to do is prepare the dough, and then everybody gets to make their own toppings and creative. One time we had the little neighbor boy over with us and he put goldfish on his pizza and he had a great time. I thought it was kind of gross, but whatever. Toppings that Luke typically likes are tomato sauce, the low fat cheese, chopped veggies, capers. He loves capers because they're so salty and briny and have that just kind of pop of flavor. Low fat proteins like shrimp, banana peppers. And I know this is really controversial, but pineapple on the pizza, my kid loves. He loves. And then that way the adults make their pizza or the other kids make their pizza, and they can put pepperonis and cheeses and they can do the healthy way too. Everybody's kind of happy and we all kind of sample each other's pizzas. Now, I don't typically give Luke my pizza because my pizza is usually pretty high in fat.
And another thing that you can do with your pizza, if you're using the non-fat cheese, and the non-fat cheese doesn't melt quite as normal as regular cheese does. And so we'll actually drizzle Christopher's MCT oil, or you can drizzle the C7 oil over top of the pizza, and it helps to melt it all, which is really nice. So that's just another trick to the trade. And making your own dough is super easy. You can do it with water and flour and yeast, and it really isn't hard and it doesn't take that long. And we have a recipe for y'all to try that with as well.
And the other thing too that I wanted to just add, my child hates fat-free dairy. He would prefer to not have it. So what we do is we buy him a regular part skim mozzarella cheese. It's a little bit lower in fat, but it's not that fat free. Um, and we measure it out really carefully, and we just use less of it, because really the amount of cheese that I use is just, it's egregious. I'll admit it, it's egregious. And we really don't need to be eating that much cheese.
And another option too is if you use a little bit of the fat-free cheese, you can put a little bit of the part skim cheese on top too. And then sometimes you can't notice a difference with that there too. So again, like you can see, there's lots of different ways to do things.
This is another Luke favorite, black bean soup night. And it's the same kind of concept. You make one thing that's relatively low in fat, and you have lots of add-ons and things. And I've actually included this recipe in the end. It's very, very simple. And again, you can get really fancy with it, or you can keep it plain Jane, really simple. And then again, we have add-ins that are appropriate both for FAODs and then toppings for non-FAODs. And honestly, I have found that some of the best flavors are those fresh lime juice. I think it's a whole game changer, and everybody can use that. Hits and misses. Some meals will be great. I mean, they're going to be complete grand slams, like my black bean soup. Some will completely strike out, and my son will be like, can I have something else? Or can we not have that again? Most are going to be somewhere in the middle. So what do you do if you have a kid who's picky? Kids learn by example. And so I always say not to eat something that you wouldn't try yourself, or that you wouldn't eat. If I'm gagging eating it, I'm certainly not going to give it to my child. Also, kids are fickle. Luke is a really good eater, but he loved sweet potatoes. Then he hated them. Then he loved them again. Then he only wanted white potatoes. Then he hated them. I mean, they're fickle. And so don't be discouraged by that, because just keep reintroducing, because sometimes it's not really what they don't like, that they don't like it. It's just, it's maybe not what they were thinking that they would like best. Or sometimes they're just asserting an opinion and some control, and that's okay. We've always been, when you have a kid who they absolutely have to eat, and they have to eat within certain parameters, we do a lot of bargaining in my house, and we bargain for positive things. So instead of taking away something, we always say, hey, if you eat 3 more bites of this, then you can, go ride your bike for 15 minutes after dinner, or you can watch this TV show if that's what floats your kid's boat. Another thing we do is we ask very specific questions. Well, what don't you like about it? Is it the taste? Is it the texture? Is it the color? Some kids just won't eat anything that's green. They just won't. They have an aversion to it. I know some adults who do that. So if you can kind of narrow down and hone in what they really don't like about it, dinners go a lot more smoothly, and also take their opinions into account. And when they get a little older, it gets a lot easier, I have to say, because Luke will say things like, I really don't like fajita night. And I'll say, but Dad and I really like fajitas. So next week we'll have burritos, which you love. This week we're having what Mom likes, because that's fair. We're a family, and we have to kind of compromise with one another.
Yeah. And it teaches them that. It teaches them to sometimes, to do things for the family too, because it's important, because it's family, mm-hmm. Right? And I think too, one of the tricks that has worked for Chris over the years, because both of my boys are very honest, like, like you could have added something more to this or something. And so like try not to take that personally after I've spent so long cooking on it, like it is one thing. But the other part of it too with Christopher, if there's something that he didn't really like, I'm like, well, I'm glad that you share that. I promise we won't have it for another 2 weeks, because and then it gives them a break. But a lot of times, like Beth said, like if you come back to it, they might like it the next go around because they say it can take over, 15 times of trying the same thing. And so we used to joke around in our family, well, you haven't tried it 15 times yet. So, we'll try it again in another couple of weeks, but then it also kind of sets the expectation that like, this is dinner, and this is what we're having, but I am taking your opinion into account too, which is important.
It also works really well when they become lazy teenagers who have an opinion on everything. I'll say, well, where were you when I was cooking dinner? You could have helped. And that's a beautiful thing, because then all of a sudden they're like little clamshells. They just shut right up. Stephanie and I have both talked about smoothies a lot. We use a lot of smoothies. We tend to drink more of them in the summer, I think, because he's home more. Now, when he's in school, he's not eating at home, and smoothies are kind of hard for that. He's also unwilling, but that's a different story. Some basic smoothies that I found are really great for snacks are a banana. Oh my gosh, bananas, you can take them right out of the freezer, frozen, or use fresh. Greek yogurt, which has a ton of protein, your fruit or veggie of choice. I love fresh greens and spinach. Luke doesn't, but I'll say to him, okay, what kind of fruits do you want me to buy this week? And he will tell me. And then he has fun kind of mixing different combinations. So that's mine that I really enjoy. Very basic.
We make one in our house we call Midnight Madness. And I think I like the name as much as the smoothie. It's fun because you can get creative with the names and stuff. We use a half a banana, a half a scoop of chocolate protein powder, and then a handful of frozen blueberries, raspberries, and a couple tart cherries, and then tart cherry juice concentrate. So and spinach is in there too. And the one thing that I learned about this is, first of all, you don't taste the spinach, and spinach is so important, filled with antioxidants and also vitamin, I think it's E. I think I'm blanking right now, but it was a nutrient that actually Christopher really needed more of. So that's when I started adding spinach to it, because his dietitian said, an easy way to get this is spinach. And I'm thinking, he already eats a lot of greens. Like, how am I going to add more? And when I added the spinach, Christopher said, oh, this is really good. So sometimes, you've got to play around with it, because you'll be surprised I was surprised that I liked it better with the spinach. And the tart cherry juice concentrate is something that we started about a year ago. I read a journal article that talked about athletes using tart cherry juice concentrate before different events to try to help with rhabdomyolysis, which is interesting. So it's not going to be a magic fix to like your rhabdo or anything like that, but it is something that fights inflammation, that's documented. And so and it's an easy way to get a liquid into your smoothies. So the great thing about smoothies, like Beth said too, is that getting those extra veggies in and those extra fruits, and they're super potent antioxidants and anti-inflammatory. And that's something that is really great. Anytime you can add more whole foods to your kiddos' nutrition and calorie source is great. And it's fun. Like, kids love smoothies. Anytime Christopher has a friend over, and if they're a picky eater, it's interesting. The kids that we've had over that are picky eaters, they always say yes to smoothies.
So what I put here is just one way to alter a recipe. So I took a traditional meatball recipe that I learned to make from this adorable little old Italian lady. And I used to make this before I had Luke. But if you look at the fat grams it's incredible how much fat we put in when we're not thinking about it. So what I did was I just kind of played around with the recipe and I made them into turkey meatballs, because ground turkey is a lot less fat than ground pork or even beef. I substituted egg whites for the eggs as the binder. And the last time I made the meatballs, I actually forgot the egg whites completely. Didn't even notice whatsoever. So there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of compare, knock down the fat a little bit here and there. And like the traditional meatball example is 10 grams of fat per meatball, whereas my turkey meatballs, as written there, is only 1 to 1.5 grams of fat per meatball, which is significant.
And you see here too, I'm going to talk about the Parmesan cheese thing again. I think because when I grew up, all I knew was this green stuff. I didn't know about black Parmesan, but you have a visual now of the two different ones. But it really does change the flavor when you add just a little bit of Parmesan on top to anything really. So that is the basic of our presentation. We have this website here that you can feel free to go to, and it gives you tons of different helpful tips and stuff that Beth and I have come up with, and also gives you some sample recipes to try. And then I also wanted to put this website too that Beth talked about with the spices. That is in our healthy tips sheet. So if you go to that, you'll find that too. Just know that you do have to cut and paste it. I don't know why, but when you click on the link, it says it's an error, but when you cut and paste it, there is no error. And it is a really great document and a really excellent resource to utilize. The other thing the last thing I want to mention too, and it's something that's in our tip sheet. Not everything, there's more stuff in our tip sheet than what we talked about tonight. But one of the things that's in there is a program called Nutrition Data. It's like nutritiondata.self.com. If you haven't found that on the internet yet, it is a really helpful place to figure out how much fat is in things. I think that was the hardest thing for me when Christopher was small, was knowing how much fat does an apple have in it. It doesn't have a nutrition label when you go to the grocery store, or how much, because everything has fat in it. And depending on your child's condition, depends on how much your dietitian wants you to focus on every single gram. Like some dietitians will say, don't worry about the fruits and vegetables. Our dietitian, like that we've worked with, we do have kind of a general sense that an apple has 0.5 gram of fat in it. And it's good too to know that like garbanzo beans have more fat in it than black beans. But again, like as your kiddos get older and they're able to have more fat, it might not matter as much as when they're younger and they can only get 3 grams of fat a day, and they've just eaten it all in garbanzo beans, so that website I found really, really helpful in just trying to understand which things were higher in fat. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop the share, and then if you have any questions or thoughts that you don't mind being recorded, we'll go ahead and talk through that, and then I'll stop the recording, and we can just continue casual conversation if there's other things you guys have questions about and want to talk about. So are there any questions or thoughts or tricks? Lucy, I was thinking about you too. There might be some people in here who have to be on a lower protein diet as well, which creates other challenges. So I don't know if anybody has.
Hi, sorry, this is Janet. I'm in Nova Scotia, Canada. Stephanie sent me the links and things a week or so ago. I have a perfect otherwise VLCAD granddaughter at 4.5 months. And as a nurse of 40 years, I never heard of this and I know nothing about it basically. And it, as you can tell, breaks my heart. But anyway, we'll get through it. I hear and I've read different things. Do they all end up taking the formula for a long time? I thought formula was for a baby. But you talk about Lipostart and things. Do they take that into whatever age? And how do they take it? Obviously, they don't drink gallons of it, I don't think. Do they?
Well, it all depends on your dietitian. So some kids will get off of the, they call it like medical formula or nutrition. Some doctors feel like the kids don't need it after a certain time. And then other dietitians think, you know what, it's best to be on it for life. And it's kind of their version of milk, like how some people have a glass of milk in the morning. So like, for example, Christopher, he's been on Lipostart since the day he was born, and his dietitian at this point thinks it's something he'll be on for the rest of his life. But he loves his Lipostart. He would be devastated if it was taken away. And the nice thing about the Lipostart is that it has the MCT in it that his body can process. So we don't have to, he still takes 7 to 8 teaspoons of MCT oil throughout the day, but it gives us like space that like sometimes he has his Lipostart with an apples, right? So he doesn't have to drizzle MCT oil over his apple, like he can just drink his Lipostart, get his MCT, and just enjoy the apple as it is. And he takes his by mouth. Some kids take theirs with a G tube if they have issues with eating. And what else? He takes about 20. He takes 22 ounces now. When he was a baby, he was up to 32. And then when he started growing, they decreased it a little bit. But Christopher's dietitian likes it because it provides him like a nice baseline of nutrition. And nutrition is so important for these kids. But Canada, might have their own opinion about that, because even within the States, from state to state, people have very different opinions about that. There's, and they just came out with guidelines for VLCAD. And Beth, I don't know if you recall or not, but I can get you the guidelines if I haven't already for VLCAD specifically. I don't remember that there was anything in the guidelines as to whether or not it was best to be on it for the rest of your life or not. Do you, Beth?
I don't. Another thing, I guess it's not a problem in Canada, but it is here in the States, is it depends on if your insurance will cover it, because these medications, like my son's formula is about $700 a month. And because of the state that we live in, he gets medical assistance because of that, regardless of their parents' income. And so they take care of that for us. But in other states where that is not happening, kids get off of it a lot sooner. So it really just depends on cost. It depends on what your dietitian wants. Luke has been on Portagen since birth, because that's what Children's Hospital put him on. And we're now just starting to wean him off of it because he hates the taste of it, contrary to Christopher. He hates it. He has a G tube, which he only uses for the formula, but he's 16. He wants to get rid of the G tube. And so the only way he can get rid of that is to either drink the formula or get off of the formula. So it's really just, it's really case by case.
Okay.
And sometimes too, I will say that I know depending on the amount of fat that the baby can have, I've heard of some parents that the dietitians will work with them to do a little bit of breast milk and a little bit of medical formula and combine it depending on how fat restricted they are. It just depends on their labs and stuff.
That's actually what we did. We combined breast milk because they were still under I don't want to say assumption. It's not an assumption. It's a proven fact that breast milk has, so many benefits to it if you're able to tolerate it. So it was a whole big recipe, and it was balanced out with something called polykose, which was like a sugar, just so that he could have those fats found in my breast milk. but he
Yeah,
could
so
never drink straight.
she had to stop the breastfeeding altogether. Well, she barely started it, but she was pumping. But anyway, she stopped that, and yet your poly, whatever you called it, we have polycal here. It's probably the same thing. It's a sugar
Probably the same
substitute
thing.
thing. So, yeah, and we are fortunate that our high taxes in Canada pay for most things medical. So for that, it's good. But we're not there yet. I mean, they're in Alberta, and they're all of their Liquigen and all of their things are fully covered. So we'll see. Sorry, Liquigen, Lipostart and Liquigen. It's fully covered out there. So at this stage, that's not an issue for us, but we'll see going. I just wasn't aware that it sounds like a lot of kids continue on it for a long time. I didn't realize that. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Are there any other questions before I stop the video? All right, I'm going to stop, but don't go anywhere, okay?